Good morning. Hello? How's everyone doing? Okay. So my name is Antonia Cereijido. I'm a producer for NPR's Latino USA, and this is Creating the Unexpected. Really, the idea of the panel is a panel about storytelling, but specifically when to have sort of like your heart open to changing it, and also how to narrow down the focus of your story. So to my right is Lynn Levy. She was the host of The Habitat and also was at Radiolab before. Molly Webster, who is a guest host at Radiolab and also a features producer, and Stephanie Fu, who's a producer at This American Life. I'm super excited for this panel. Like, I'm a huge fan of everyone on stage, so I'm excited for them to tell us about their process and how they come up with their stories. While we were talking before, we sort of put the way that we approach storytelling into three buckets, or like three things that you need to do. You need to find a story, you need to pitch it, and then you need to try to make it in a way that's satisfying and engaging. So let's start with how to find a story. Molly, you recently did a series about gonads. How did you approach finding the stories for that series?
How did I? Well, I started with this like big bucket that was like an idea that I wanted to do some sort of series of radio stories on human reproduction, which is an even bigger bucket than gonads. I'll just talk about essentially one story that happened within there, like to be specific, talking about how to find story ideas. And so when I went into doing the series, I had this idea that there was this sort of, I don't know, rumor, a thing that I had seen in scientific papers that IVF, right, in vitro fertilization, which involves the making of embryos in a petri dish and sometimes freezing those embryos and sometimes using them right away, that IVF was actually propelled forward by the Catholic Church in Italy in this like contradictory way, that the Catholic Church had made a law, and the law was that you can't throw away any embryos, and then because of that, people started freezing embryos, and then IVF became the thing because all of a sudden you could freeze things. And so I thought like, oh, this is such a great story idea. This is going to be really great and so contradictory. And then once I started looking into it, it just basically started falling apart. Like the timelines didn't really add up. It was more about embryo freezing, and I had actually been thinking about egg freezing, and it was just like not really adding up to a story in any sort of way. And so in the middle of like call after call after call, like talking about frozen body parts, I ended up having a conversation with someone who just said like, well, if you think freezing's interesting, you should talk to someone about ovary freezing. And that actually was like a nugget that ended up leading us to our entire second episode of this 6-part series about ovary freezing.
So it was in the reporting and talking to so many people that you found this other path forward.
Yes, it was lots of phone calls, and then also just being aware in the middle of what wasn't working. Like I had an idea for a story, and like seeing those moments when they just weren't adding up to actually, and it's not like I made up the idea for the story for myself. It was like hearsay and like different things that had been put together, but it just didn't end up working out sort of that in a way that like would lead to a narrative moment. And so sort of both accepting within myself when that started to crumble, and then also trying to figure out like what the real story was, and being open and aware of, this moment on the phone when someone said to me, you should look into ovarian tissue freezing. And the same thing actually happened with the entire series, like to bury the lead, was the reason gonads became gonads was because I was talking to an ovarian freezing doctor. Like I was talking to him about this like little thing this little lead I got in this one phone call, and I was talking to him, and in the call he just said to me, gonads are magical organs. That was like the close of the call. That was how the call ended. And I just was like, what does that mean? And so I sent him a note afterwards and was like, what do you mean gonads are magical organs? Like scientists never say magic. And then he sent this actually like long email about mystery and poetry and like the human species trying to survive. And I was like, we've got our series, folks.
Amazing. All right, what about you, Lynn?
I would just say I feel like that is so frequently where the stories come from is like, oh, you think you're interested in this topic. And then as you're looking into this topic, somebody says something, may not even be that close, like that's pretty closely related still, may not even be that closely related to the topic. And you're just like, oh, this tiny little thing is actually the thing. Which is actually so like, story finding for me is like often about a tiny little thing that's buried in another thing. And I did a story at Radiolab that was about, it was about dolphins. It was an episode about dolphins. And I thought it was going to be about this like very serious or like big deal dude scientist who studied dolphin communication. And I went to see a big deal dude researcher talk about the dude. And buried in that talk, he was like, oh, you know, by the way, this guy had an assistant, and she lived in a flooded dolphin apartment with the dolphin, and the dolphin like swam around her bed and under her desk, and she had a typewriter suspended from the ceiling. And I was like, oh, well, that seems more interesting. Like a lot more interesting. But one of the things that I learned in this particular story finding process was like that you have to fake bravery. And the way that I learned that was I went up to this guy after the talk and I said, that woman, she sounds amazing. Is there any way you could help me get in touch with her? And he said, well, she won't talk to anyone. You're never going to get her. You should just forget it because during this year, she may have given that dolphin a hand job. And she got a lot of shit for it, and she doesn't want to talk to anybody. And I thought, okay, well, that's that. And I just put it aside, and I was like, forget it, I can't do this story. But I never forgot it. I never forgot that story. I always was thinking about this woman and what the hell happened in the apartment with the dolphin. And for literally 3 years, I sat on that story thinking, well, she's not going to talk to me. Oh, well, I'll never be able to do this story, having never called her. And if anybody out there, like, I don't know, if anybody out there is thinking like, oh, this story, it'll never work, I can't do it, like, for this reason and this reason, like, don't you be the person who says that. Like, let them say it to you, because then I called her. And she said, oh, I've actually been thinking it's time to talk about this. Yeah, I'll definitely talk to you. Let's do it.
I love that story. It's so good. Well, let's move on to pitching. Stephanie, you've like given workshops on pitching, and I find this to be the most enigmatic and difficult part of the process. So how do you approach pitching stories?
I think that there's just a ridiculous amount of pre-reporting that needs to happen before I have a pitch. And that generally means me calling people and finding who the good talker is. And of course, if you don't know who the good talker is, a good talker is someone who is nice to listen to, like reflective about their life, preferably funny, or at the very least emotional, has like some feelings about the story or whatever they're going to tell you. So a lot of my story finding process is digging for that person, and who is the person who's going to be so exciting about the story that I'm going to love it. And I think once that happens, then the pitch is actually really easy, because I transcribe my pre-interviews, and when somebody says something funny, or when, like, I remember I was pitching a story about deep frying turkeys, and I was pre-interviewing these dudes, firefighters, who make these deep fried turkey cautionary videos where they purposefully blow up turkeys. And you can see them sort of like smirking in the background of the videos. And so I was like, why are you laughing? And they're like, well, obviously this is the one time a year we get to like blow things up instead of put fires out. So it's the best thing ever. And, that is what I put in my pitch. I was like, including some details about my favorite firefighters, the funniest, stupidest firefighters. And I think also I try to put a little flavor of myself in there. I try to talk about why I care about the story. Because if I don't care about the story, then I can't ask anybody else to care about the story. And so a lot of my pitch is also selling it. Like, I think this story is awesome because, and for that story, I was kind of like, this story has no plot and it's dumb. But like, I love watching these turkeys explode more than anything in the world. It's just my favorite new hobby. And I think this is just like a wonderful Christmas story. And I also sold it by saying like that the 12 days of Christmas, there were like something like 625 birds in that song. And I was like, because birds are Christmas and it's Christmas episode, come on. So it's a lot of like salesmanship as well.
I can't believe you got away with that.
I know, me neither. Yeah.
You did this story that's about people who have a condition where they can remember everything.
Right.
And at what point did you pitch that story with the ultimate kind of story arc that it has aired? Because yeah.
So I actually didn't pitch that one. I was assigned it. But it's about these people who can remember every moment of their lives. So you can ask them, what was the weather on July 24th at 4 p.m. 1975? And they'll be able to say like, it was sunny, I ate this for lunch, and I had conversations with these 3 people, and this is what we talked about. And I thought this was incredible, and so I interviewed all of these people, and they were great. Like, it totally held up. Like, I asked them, okay, which episode is the one where Ross and Rachel kiss? And they were like, okay, December 1995, Monday is when this aired, and this is the plot of the episode. It was nuts. So I did all of these interviews, and I brought them to my editors, and I played this tape, and they were like, this is a fun party trick, but why should we care? And I was like, but look how cool it is. And they just didn't believe me for like 6 months. I kept saying like, we should do the story. And they were like, no. And finally, I think one of my editors was like, why do you care so much? Why do you really want this story to even happen? And I was like, well, because I'm obsessed with keeping memories inside my head. Like, I journal obsessively. I sometimes like record in my phone what happened that day because I feel like what's even the point of living a life if you don't get to keep it? And then they were like, there you go, that's the interesting thing. And so that became the bookend for the story, is me talking about how much I want to keep my memories, then having them talk about the blessing, and it turns out sort of a curse of keeping a memory that long in your life. And me at the end sort of thinking, maybe it's okay to just let things go. And that the way that taught me a lesson wound up being like saving that story and making it actually worth something.
Yeah. Do you want to play the clip from the story?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is what it wound up being the first minute before we even got to the tape.
HSAM is the clip.
I have several large, unwieldy boxes stacked in corners of my apartment. I almost never open them, but I've schlepped these boxes to the 12 tiny apartments I've lived in the past decade. They're full of notebooks, external hard drives, thousands of sheets of paper, photographs, VHS tapes, full of all my memories, starting with journals I wrote when I was 5 years old. The idea that there are whole weeks, even months of my life that have just disappeared into the abyss of forgetfulness is horrifying to me. If I can't take these memories with me to the rest of my life, then what's the point of even living them in the first place? To hold onto the past, a couple times a month, I'll sit at my kitchen table and I'll just start recording these long soliloquies about whatever.
A 6-pack of Corona and Pacifico is $11, which I thought was super atrocious. And so I tried to buy like a 4-pack of cans of Corona cans. And he was like, oh, that's $9. And I was like, well, I might as well just buy the 6-packs.
Because I'm sure in the year 2030, that memory is going to be helpful. So all this to say that my obsession with my ever-fleeting memories is what made me really excited when I heard about this condition called HSAM. It stands for Highly Superior Autobiographical Memory.
Yeah. I love that story. This is not a panel about writing, but I also think all the women here are amazing writers. I love also like there's a part in Gonads where Molly is like, it's freezing outside, but we're talking about a different freezing. Like, it's really funny to me. So we've been talking about all parts of the process as we've been talking about how we approach our stories. I did one story about the idea that there's this like stereotype that Latinos cry a lot. There's like that meme, I don't know if any of you have seen it, that's like cries in Spanish. And like there's like the idea in telenovelas, they're always crying. And I was curious, like, is there any way to prove whether that's true, that Latinos cry more? Because it certainly felt true to me. So I spent like 3 years kind of bouncing off different ideas about how could I prove this, how could I collect any information that would answer this question. And I got a lot of really personal, beautiful testimony from like telenovela stars and all these things. But one of the things that I decided to do was I did a fake survey where I sent out to 6 Latinos, 6 non-Latinos, the survey about caffeine. And I was saying that it was like, how much coffee do you drink? And then I'd ask other questions like, did you call your parents today? And one of the questions was, did you cry today? To see whether my Latino friends cried more. And so I have a clip of when I interviewed the white guy that I had in my survey about his crying. Okay, so I have to admit something to you, which is this wasn't a caffeine survey.
Whoa, I'm shocked.
Do you remember crying?
I don't specifically, but I can see that happening, you know?
Well, I mean, so you don't feel like you cry often, actually?
If I had to guess, I would say it was like 2 to 3 times a year.
Even though you cried like 3 times during the day.
But that's also probably me projecting what I want, thinking that I'm John Wayne.
It's very short. Yeah, but I think there's like a lot of different ways to approach the kind of questions you have. I mean, Molly, when you approach your stories, like, how do you stay open and how do you know to turn to the right?
How do I know? Well, there's a feeling of like flailing that then you're thinking, okay, how do I unflail? Like I've got to go to a meeting tomorrow and tell them something. So there's motivation in that for sure. And then I just think like, things that I can't stop thinking about basically, which is, I got off a phone call with someone who said, gonads are magical organs, and I think I told everyone in the office was having like Friday happy hour drinks like at their desks, and I was going up to them going, this guy just said gonads are magical organs, and then I thought about it all weekend, and then I emailed him, and he actually had more to say about it once I emailed, which I was surprised about, and then it just became like, okay, if this is exciting to me, I guess that's like another thing of like something feels very like, I don't know, I just get a little sparkly feeling in my chest, and so I just let myself like chase the sparkle, and see where it goes, and it went all over the place. Yeah,
I love that it was like happy hour drinks because I feel like it's a radio. So I used to work at Radiolab with Molly, and it's like a Radiolab trope when you're pitching. Like, how would you tell this story if you were telling it to your friend at a bar?
Yeah.
And that is literally the exact thing that you did.
Yeah. I'm shushing everyone while they're talking and having drinks, and then I just told them about it.
Lynn, you had to plan out like a whole series. Did you allow for like moments of unexpected things to come up? How did you plan for that?
Yeah, I really had no choice but to plan for moments of unexpected things to come up. So my series was following this group of people who were secluded for a year in a dome on the side of a mountain pretending to be on Mars. It was a NASA-funded experiment, and I didn't have access to them. I didn't have physical access to them. They were in total seclusion. So I had very, very, very little control over what my tape was, and there was years worth of it. And so, yeah, I really had to roll with it in a way I've never had to roll with it before. And there were a lot of times when I thought that the series wasn't going to work. Should we play the?
You do one?
Yeah, I have a clip I just want you to be with me in this moment as I am sitting at my desk receiving these clips on Dropbox for this series that I've committed to making already. The series is happening, and this is the tape that's arriving.
Yeah.
Do you have it?
For raw.
I'm just going to tell you right now, nothing else is going to happen in this tape. I don't know how much of it I gave you. I think maybe a minute, but there were like 30 minutes of that. And there's a very strong impulse to panic in that situation. But the funny thing about listening to that tape, and what that tape is somebody recharging batteries. I really became very invested in that tape because there was a lot of tape like that coming, and it was my one window into this. It was this window into this experience that these people were having very far away from me, and you know, I had the sparkly feeling, but I realized like nobody else in the world would ever have a sparkly feeling listening to that tape. And so the challenge of that became like, well, how can I try to convey to other people like what I'm experiencing? So I also brought like, how did that tape end up in the show?
Hey Lynn, it's Carmel. I'm just getting started on recharging batteries for the day.
As the weeks go by and recordings from the habitat start to pile up, I get a better idea of what daily life is really like in there. And yeah, there are salsa lessons and ukulele duets, but more and more what I hear is stuff like this. Carmel waking up and recharging every battery in the hab, knowing she's going to have to do the same thing again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. It's the Yule log of audio recordings. I listen to the crew rehydrate their dried chicken and run in place and ride the exercise bike and rehydrate more dried chicken and run in place and ride the exercise bike. I listen to conversations like this one.
Sunk or synced?
I don't know.
Sank?
This is Tristan and Carmel trying to agree on the past tense of the word
Sunk?
sink.
Sink, sunk.
Having it. I don't think there's a word
sunk.
for it. You realize that the audio we're making right now is like lethally boring?
I'm sure it is, but this is the majority of our day. It's like talking about stupid, boring things.
So I don't know. I played that for you to say, I guess, basically that yes, like I have had the experience of having to roll with audio that is not what I anticipated, and like trying to figure out how to make that work. But also, I feel like what a lot of us have been saying is that we are driven by things that are inexplicably very important to us, like things that resonate with us that are hard to put down, hard to put away, like, and so even though I cannot logically explain to you why I cared about that tape of that woman charging batteries, like, I cared about it. And so I tried very hard to find a way to make it work.
That's awesome. So last question, I'm going to ask it to you, Stephanie, is it sounds like, Lynn, you had tape that was like you had to really find a way to write around it and make people understand. But there's sometimes cases where you have an interesting topic and like it could go, you know it's interesting and you know a lot of people who are good talkers. How do you take like a broad idea and then narrow it down? For instance, in that story you did, the real decoy.
Right. So that actually started with this idea. Well, when I met my boyfriend on Tinder, he had a picture of himself in uniform, and I said, "Thank you for your service." And that's not what you say to people who have served. It's actually I realized that I had screwed up, and I realized that it was really hard to talk to veterans about their service without re-traumatizing them. or sounding sort of cliche and naive. And so I wanted to do a story about how to talk to veterans. And so I was talking about this with Hannah, and she was like, I think that like the thing you need to do is find a veteran who has found a weird adaptation to the way that he talks to civilians. Like, find a veteran who can tell you about how civilians talk to veterans. And so I just called all of these different writers and soldiers and was like, do you know somebody who has figured out the secret to talking to civilians? And somebody told me about this guy who came up with decoy stories, where if somebody asked him about any part of his service, he would come up with a funny decoy for it. And it wound up being this really moving, incredible story. And I wouldn't have been able to do it without Hannah just like narrowing it down to the central question of the thing. Like, what is it for a veteran to have to learn how to exist in this world? And can you find somebody who is in the middle of struggling with that? And so I try to take that to all of my stories now, is like try and find that central question and then that central person to tie it all around.
That's a good way to end. Find the central question, find the central person. Thank you so much, everyone on this panel. This has been so great. Thank you.